I bought a vacuum tube headphone amplifier at a secondhand store and things did not go as expected. There's also something about it being radioactive or possibly toxic, but we'll talk about that later. The exact origins of the vacuum tube are a bit blurry, but it's widely accepted that it was invented in 1904 by John Fleming. At the time, inventors needed to find a way to pass electrical signals in a single direction, and Fleming's diode vacuum tube was the solution. It works with something called thermonic emission, which is the transmission of a current using a heated conductor. This latest development was quickly used in shipboard radios, as the other options at the time relied on crystals and would constantly break due to vibrations or bumping. In April of 1915, General Electric was the first one to introduce a diode vacuum tube into power supply circuits for their products. From there, it saturated the electronics industry and ended up in everything from a household radio to a microwave. During this time, the military found that adding a small amount of radioactive substances would enhance certain characteristics needed to make the earliest radar systems work, and the medical community used them in early X-ray machines. During the space race, vacuum tubes were used in every craft from the earliest flights of Alan Shepard through the Apollo missions, with the Apollo guidance computer having 4,000 tiny vacuum tubes alone. Unfortunately, beginning in the mid-1960s, transistors were replacing vacuum tubes in most new electronics, as they're smaller, cheaper, and longer lasting. In 1962, the first solid-state guitar amp was introduced by Kay Musical Instruments. However, many musicians still wanted to use their tube amps and continue to this day. In present times, they have two uses. Audiophiles use them in amplifiers, saying that they have color and warmth to music, and radio enthusiasts use them to rebuild and maintain antique radios. Supposedly, US military keeps a stockpile of them for their nuclear arsenal and antiquated military gear. But that's just a conspiracy. If you're looking to purchase any of them these days, you'll likely have to look in Central Europe or possibly China. Because these tubes require toxic elements such as heavy metals to produce them, it's often prohibitively expensive to produce them anywhere else in the world. Chinese tubes are generally considered decent quality, but more often than not, they're just copies of either Russian or Slovakian vacuum tubes. I was so excited, but when I got home and plugged it in, I was severely disappointed that it didn't work. So I flew to the internet, and to my surprise, the only place I could find a tube that fit this amplifier was on eBay. And even stranger, the tube I needed was manufactured in the late stages of the Soviet Union. The tube I ended up ordering was a GU-32 vacuum tube made for the Soviet Union military. It was manufactured in the Soviet Union in the 50s and is definitely toxic in that it's made with heavy metals. I doubt it's radioactive unless it was stored in a warehouse where a nuclear reactor was. I could use a Geiger counter to measure this, which, if you didn't know, also uses vacuum tubes.
Wow.
Unfortunately, I didn't get it in time, but let's plug it in and see what the 1960s sounds like. If you enjoyed this, consider subscribing and check out this playlist.